I'm really, really eager to get into today's conversation. I think it's a critical one given the times that we're in at the moment, particularly about 5G. We can get into a whole range of topics. Specific area is 5G and all of its dangers and its complications that come with it. So I was doing a little bit of research. I've been doing a lot of research actually over the last 3 or 4 years about 5G. And it really peaked, it seemed, just before the pandemic hit. Lots of talk about 5G. And then it sort of fizzed out into the background. But it's quite a critical point. In fact, it's one of the main pillars, which I think you probably agree, in terms of the infrastructure that they're trying to bring out to society. So I'm really eager to get into this conversation. If you wouldn't mind, for the viewers watching, just go into a little bit of background on who you are and what, how you got into what you are now.
Sure. Well, I'm actually really surprised to be sitting here at talking to you or anybody else and traveling around the country talking about this topic, which is what I do. It's like my full-time job now, my full-time unpaid job, I might say. As you can probably see by the color of my beard, I'm a little bit older than yourself. And so I started in my computing career around about 1968. So I was working on it for 30 years. I sort of retired in round about 2000. I finished a contract in Tanzania and decided enough was enough. There's many reasons for that. So I've been working through the growth of technology ever since that time, since 1968. Of course, it was very different in those days, but I hope the brain still works in the same way. There's the same logic, the same analysis that requires doing. And we had the online, what we used to call online computing, developing in the last years of the previous century. So I was aware of all that stuff. In fact, where I was working, we had one of the first systems that would do that. And then, of course, technology took leaps and bounds forward in the next decade and 2 decades. I was looking at the rise of radio frequencies, and when I do give talks, I really insist that people need to consider 3G, 4G particularly, and even 2G as well. It's not just about 5G. 5G is a great marketing tool. It's been a great marketing tool, and it is a very different technology than we're used to before. But those other ones at 4G, one of the importances of that was when we started covering the whole surface of the Earth, and we hadn't had time to get up to satellites. Whether satellites exist or not, that's another topic, so for another conversation, I think. But before we had all of those, 4G came out, and that is when people, particularly nature researchers and observers, started noticing the decline in biodiversity, insects, and other animals. Yeah, and of course, it's going to affect where we can't see in the seas and and in the ground, in the soil as well. It's going to affect those things which are fundamental. And then of course, when we come to 5G, which is a really important topic in itself, I quite agree. But I just like to remind people that we've still got those other things around. They are not disappearing. We have been told that 3G will be taken out of commission by 2030, was what our government announced. But I do know that, or I hear companies saying that they're dropping it already. So that's, and interestingly enough, if you wanted to choose between 2G, 3G, and 4G in terms of the radiation against you when you're using a phone, 3G is the best for that. It's the lowest radiation, frequency radiation that you would have lower even than 2G and certainly lower than 4G. So again, I'm not saying that that's deliberate, but so it's interesting that that's going. Whether it will go completely, I don't know, and I'm pretty sure that we're going to have 4G for a long, long time yet.
So when 5G then is introduced, they don't just discontinue the previous version. It's still there. Like
it's still there, and I'm often asked, is 5G turned on? Are we using 5G? And what about 6G, Ian? And to some extent, I always have to answer that, well, I don't know, because one of the big differences, and this is another thing that should make us concerned, we're not being told so many things. It's almost as if it is being kept secret. You know, one of the reasons why there was so little specific biological testing before 5G came out was because the scientists weren't actually being given the sufficient information to be able to test it properly. There's a little bit more, but still not a huge amount. You know, the lab tests are going to be inadequate in some ways. They give us a feel for what may happen because you can never reproduce in a lab what we're getting in the real world. You know, the pulsing, the modulation, the changes, and it's those pulses and modulations that are really the biggest effect on us. You know, if it's a steady sine wave frequency, then it is not as harmful to biological life.
Let's really get into that then. So if we can make this a real clear picture for someone who's watching here, let's talk about the effects of, let's start with 3G, and then we can work our way up to 5G. What is the big difference there? So there's a clear difference in the radiation and the technology that they use. And you say 3G is, well, quote unquote, safer.
Yes, the lowest radiation when you're holding your phone against your head.
Right.
That's all I would say. That's all I was saying. No more than that.
So it's not actually. Well, I mean, it's not safe, but it's better, I suppose.
Yeah.
Than 5G.
Well, I mean, what I can say is that no airwaves of radio frequencies are actually safe. They all have some downsides, from electricity wires that are running on pylons above your house. That way, if you look back at the work of Sam Milham, who was an epidemiologist, is an epidemiologist. He's still working. He wrote a book called Dirty Electricity, which is a really good read, actually. And he was looking at the electrification of America. And I'm not sure which way he was doing his analysis, but what he found was a correlation between when the cities around America, this city, then that city, I don't know the exact order, and he noted that some 10 years later, a similar pattern of cancers was appearing. And that gave him, he's referenced, Arthur Firstenberg has referenced him in his book as well. But I say, you can go straight to the horse's mouth, as they say, and read Sam's book as well. Both good books, incidentally, and with a historical perspective of how we got to where we are now. And it's all, it is, if you're really, really interested, it's worthwhile reading those books to get a full picture. I mean, even Charles Dickens, the writer Charles Dickens, who I'm sure you know of, yes, that Charles Dickens, who was actually a very good observer of his time, and wrote many articles in newspapers and all sorts of things, picked up on the fact that there were increasing illnesses around. And there was one doctor, I seem to remember from reading, he's mentioned in Arthur's book, George Beard, I think he was, who had spotted that there was this strange new disease. He called it neurasthenia, which was about nervous, just means nervous, a nervous disease. And they were looking, he was looking at the actual cause as an external cause. That was the name. I mean, the meaning of nerves in those days was literally our physical nerves in our body. The psychologist Freud changed all that when he introduced the word nerves or nervous to be a psychological or a mental thing, not simply the physical. So Beard was wondering what the physicality of it was. Freud changed that to a non-physicality, and really the investigation stopped there. So we've lost a lot of work that could have been done, if people had not completely switched their attitude when Freud did that, made that comment. It's all in your mind. Because they could.
So there's definite then. So when society went electric, when electricity was starting to become more prominent, there is a direct correlation in between that introduction and, let's say, the impact on human health.
Yes. I mean, one thing that I'm not sure is, I think it was Sam who did this comparison at the time. There's one group of people at the time in America who had no electricity whatsoever, still don't. It's called the Amish community, of course, as you will recognize. And he did take a look at those to see if the cancer had increased in them at a similar rate that it had in the rest of the population. Now, of course, it's a small control group. It's, so there's, I don't know how many Amish communities there are up and down the country. But at the time, because there was no swamping of it with radiation from the masts and that were going to come in later years, early 20th century, he couldn't do that now because they're going to be swamped by it. Maybe not quite so closely, but it's not such a clean control group anymore. Because they're going to be affected by it through the airwaves, just as the rest of us are. So that's an interesting thing. And the Amish their rates of cancer did not change at all, and they were very low as well. So that was his comparison. I'm pretty sure he's got that written up in his Dirty Electricity book. It's a long time since I read it, I have to confess. But it's worth that for a historical background, and where we've come from and how we got here.
Yeah, because I was looking earlier, just before we started this. I was just trying to do some research on the dangers of 5G, just refreshing my memory. And a lot has changed over the last 5 years in terms of what you have access to on the internet for this information. It's highly, highly controlled. So I just want to share something now. So this is on PubMed. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but this is where all the latest scientific studies are released. Adverse health effects 5G mobile networking under real life conditions. So this article identifies adverse effects of non-ionizing, non-visible radiation. It emphasizes it basically said that these will affect the eyes. Oh, here it is. So this article also presents evidence that 5G mobile networking technology will affect not only the skin and eyes, as
yes,
will have adverse systemic effects as well.
Yeah, he's absolutely right, or they are absolutely right. And there are so many articles, research papers. I've yet to read any research paper, and I've read quite a few, and that has no cases, that says none of our case studies suffered any adverse effects whatsoever. I've yet to see that case. They always say, you know, the number of cases that were affected negatively is insignificant or something like that. There is no clear evidence. Matt Warman, when he was the Minister of All Things Digital, wrote a similar thing to, he didn't use the word clear. There's no convincing evidence, I think was his word in the letter. But convincing to who? You know, this is the way that yeah, exactly. That's right. It's the way they get round, or the industry, if you like, can get round it by saying things like that. But one interesting thing is, have you come across the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection? Bit of a mouthful. Okay, well that was set up in 1990. The 1990s anyway. Issued its first report. The idea was that it would act as an international group that would set exposure standards which would be safe. I'll use that word for now. What they actually did, they produced a paper, first one in 1998. The most recent one is in 2020.